Bill Nowlin, July 9th, 1999. Go.
Okay, you asked about July 1974. We put out 8 albums that month, and the most we'd ever put out in the previous month was June 1972 for some reason. We put out 5 that month. Then there was only other one month we had 4 in July of 1973. Somehow looks like in the middle of the year, June or July, there's a little burst. My guess is that that wasn't by design, that was just an accumulation of the quantity. I imagine, though, also every year in July, then we used to set up a record shop at the Smithsonian Festival of American Folklife and actually sell records on the mall there. So I noticed in '74 we didn't put out any in August, September, or October. We probably stacked them up and tried to get them out real quick, just because that was a big event usually for us. But usually there was not, I mean, it was years, I say it was into the 90s before there was any conscious thought about what month to put out an album in, that you'd get better radio play if you put out a record in January or August as opposed to putting out in October when you'd have no chance of getting airplay, or because all the major labels put out their big hit records then. Almost nobody puts out records in January, so we always try to, because there's an open spot there. There's no ratings books going on with radio stations or anything. It's just kind of an open time. We get a lot of airplay at college stations, obviously, and students are back. They're fresh, maybe, and it just seems like a very good time for us. But that particular month, we put out an album the albums that we put out were Buzz Busby, Leon Morris, and whatever that group was called, that fairly obscure, real hardcore bluegrass. Johnny Wisnett, banjo player. A second album by Don Stover. The first one had been out for, looks like about a year, almost 2 years, 23 months. A second album by Tony Trischka. Put out a reissue album of early recordings by the Blue Sky Boys. 2010 was John Lee, who is an acoustic blues guitar player from Alabama, I think. The Boys of the Lock, their second album, but it was the first one we put out. And the D.L. Menard and the Louisiana Aces record. So it's kind of an eclectic mix of records that just all happened to come out at the same time. There'd been nothing in June either. So there was just this one cluster of records. Then in November we put out 3 more, and there was nothing in December. The whole year of '74, the first 6 months of the year, we put out a total of 7 albums, then bang, 8 all at once. It was probably foolish. You should really try to spread them out and give your distributor 2 records a month or something like that. These days we'd think about that type of thing, but I don't think we really thought about it much back then.
I imagine, again, talking and following on our other conversation, that is an odd mix of records, and there was no particular effort to do anything beyond getting them out, I guess, and getting them into the hands of your distributors and down to D.C.
No, it must have been kind of exciting for us to have so many records all at once, but it's a long time ago, I can't remember that feeling exactly.
Did you, the D.L. Menard, was that your first station record?
It was, yeah.
Was there do you remember anything about that? Was there discussion about that at all, or a sense of excitement about branching into something? I gather none of you knew too much about it.
Well, nobody did much. I think even then I had already been to Louisiana myself and been doing some of the research that 2 years later resulted in the first 2 albums, survey albums. Those because DL was given number 6003. So we'd already assigned the other 2 numbers. And that was a long project. I mean, that was a lot of work that went into
you assigned them and they weren't out yet.
Right. Yeah, there were pre-existing tapes that were recorded in '65 and '66 by Ralph Rinsler. And I went to Ralph's place out on, well, first of all, I went to Louisiana. I got permissions from everybody. I took photographs of everybody. A couple of them had died, but then I visited relatives. And there was I did some interviewing, asking, to get some more biographical information, and then we had to go edit the tapes. We did a preliminary thing, and then of course once we found out who we actually had final permissions from, we had to do that. Ralph married into a rather wealthy family that owned an island off the coast of Massachusetts. And they don't even have automobiles on the island. It's a big island, but he came down and met me with a horse and buggy at the dock where they have the mailboat came in once a day or whatever. It's a very interesting experience, and living in this old house there for a couple days going over the tapes. But it was a long, long time. He was very careful about proofreading everything. He took forever. I think he was working on other stuff too. But it just was an incredibly long and frustrating process. But so we actually started those other ones, but the Al Menard record, by 2 years, was the first one to come out.
Yeah.
I don't know that. Certainly, we knew that it was a different kind of music. I took French in high school and college, so I could speak French a little bit. And I just remember how surprised I was the first time I went to Louisiana and found that it was not a spoken. There was only a spoken language on it. There were not. I thought I would be seeing billboards and signs in the stores all in French, and because I just didn't know that it was simply that, and that in fact it was forbidden in the schools. Want to pause it?
Yeah, you want to notice at the stop.
Sometimes because magazines want to be independent. They don't want to look like they're just trying to help out a record company. But on the other hand, if you've got a magazine that is a booster of the music in question, and they're going to put out a feature album sometime in the next year, such a group, it does make sense to tie it in.
Well, I imagine, and maybe we're in some ways off the subject. I imagine reviews are kind of difficult for magazines like that are niche music interests. Does Bluegrass Unlimited take albums by major bluegrass stars and pan them? Does Living Blues do the same thing? They do it, I know, but there's got to be a lot of tension.
I don't know that.
They do, and then they occasionally they do, and then they lose subscribers. Everybody in the family cancels their subscription.
There's lots of tensions. There's the family aspect. There's advertisers, which is a huge conflict of interest that you must deal with all the time. You advertise in these magazines, and they pan your records.
Well, they
don't pan our
for
records.
most records, if they didn't have anything to say about it, they would be good about it. They might just not review it.
Not review it, yeah.
There are very few records that. There's maybe a half dozen records a year that they have to review.
Yeah.
Because it's just an outstanding record by a prominent figure or something like that.
Yeah. They're very different, though. I think Bluegrass now, for a while, and they still might, had a policy of this: if they weren't going to review it positively, they wouldn't review it.
Right, with the goal being we want to get good bluegrass out to get notices, and if it's bad bluegrass, screw it. It won't get written up.
But I don't know if they still do that, but and I do know that editors sometimes will go into a bad review and tone them down to try to prevent negative feedback.
And some reviewers, I don't think this is so much true today, but there was a time in the past where reviewers liked to tear records down.
Yeah.
It was just like it was fun or something like that, sadistic pleasure of some nature or other. I can remember when Ken and I both used to write record reviews sometimes. It was kind of fun to do that kind of thing sometimes, but I don't see that much anymore in any publications. I don't really see people going out of their way to really slam a record in particular. I suspect that most people are more careful about making their records, and companies don't put out records.
Bob Wyman does.
What? Things records
And
apart?
Music Row, yeah. He's really feared. He's very, he's very, I think he's very fair from my taste, in that if something sucks, he says it, and uses, all kinds of wonderful language to, to say that this thing never should have gotten out of the studio, or, that it's a total embarrassment, and but if something's good, we'll give it the highest grades. But he's really feared.
We just get him to write liner notes for us.
So you were telling me about going down to Louisiana and discovering about languages and researching the Whistler.
what Michael was asking is when we put out the D.L. Menard record, which even though it was number 3, came out 2 years before the Winford tape.
Right,
Because
yeah.
he must have had so long. But
Yeah.
so, what the question was whether we thought we were doing anything remarkable, novel, different, groundbreaking by putting out a Cajun record at that time. I don't recall that we necessarily thought that we were. Chris Dracula had already done several.
Yeah.
And of course we knew about Swallow, and there were other companies doing it. I think we knew it was different, and hardly anybody else was doing it. But I don't think that we necessarily thought of it as a major.
I don't think we primarily thought that what we were doing was breakthrough.
That was important, certainly.
I mean, there are certain areas, I think, that a major contribution we've had in bluegrass is women in bluegrass. I think, that was something we were aware of both as being political in the 60s, Marion being involved in the women's movement, and we've recorded virtually every important woman in bluegrass, and I think that was conscious, and we were making an effort, and I think we also were conscious of the new acoustic music movement. But I think I think Scott's very aware in the Zydeco area right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we did our first Beau Soleil record, we were aware that we were doing something different, although it wasn't as progressive as Koto, who we had seen but weren't able to record. But, as far as the first Beau Soleil record on Rounder really making, we knew that it was forging new ground and expanding in terms of what had been previously recorded.
Yeah, and that never, unlike say a Thorogood and that the kind of agony that might have caused momentarily, if only momentarily, that never bothered you. Either the new acoustic movement or expanding the boundaries of Cajun music, something like that. Was that something that you just thought was?
Well, it was. I think it was different in that Thorogood was, close to rock.
Yeah, which was
That was very
commercial and
different.
evil and
The Cajun, expanding the Cajun repertoire and direction, I don't think bothered any of us.
Because I kind of still stay true to your political, anti-capitalist, pluralist roots, in a sense.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And yet,
That's the
some
dichotomy.
level
That's
of
why
way.
rock is evil and an expansive Cajun album is not.
Yeah, but I think, that throughout it all, even when we did something that was a little bit progressive for whatever the genre, we were still very aware of the roots, and I don't know if Joel's gotten into this at all, but early on, we had the fortune, I would say, looking back, at having seen what happened with Elektra. And, having bought or certainly listened to a lot of the more traditional things that Elektra put out, and then came in whatever order Bread and the Doors and, and the end of their folk music.
Right.
And when Thorogood came along, we got all kinds of people saying, well, we're the next George Thorogood and this and that. And we weren't really tempted to go after it and to change our direction, where a lot of other people might have been, certainly Elektra had been.
Did you recall when we put out the first By Conti album? No, the first one.
Yeah.
Did you recall there being any discussion about this being significantly different, being an African record of world music? I just remembered Mark Bieber showing up with enthusiasm that he was doing it as an academic residency or something, and thinking that he was valid and it was just the real thing,
Yeah.
and so forth, and just being like a folkways record. This is we should have a series of records like that. I don't remember it being subject of much really much discussion.
The embarrassing thing that I remember, maybe it's embarrassing, is thinking that we could tie in to the hands of Leo Tucky and people like that this was, incredible guitar playing
Oh, with the
in a
record.
sense,
Yeah.
and that, that anybody who liked that kind of thing should love Visconti. And it was such a great story, and obviously,
But it wasn't a soul-searching kind of thing.
No.
It seemed to fit right in because Folkways would have been happy to put it out, or Hooley probably might have. I don't know. He didn't do that much international stuff. Well, later he did a group
Yeah.
Guess I asked Bill how you were sure it wasn't African lounge music. You just took somebody's word for it, I guess, so you knew had a sense of the person bringing it to you.
it's just a sense. Well, it wasn't
Yeah.
even the person. We didn't know Mark Peabler from anything.
He just called on the phone one day and asked if he could come on pop.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess what interests me about the Cajun Records, the series you worked on with Ralph, is that he had a long association with Mo Ash, and he didn't go to Mo with that, and Mo was still,
Yeah.
he was still going. It wasn't
Right.
going very well, but he was still going, and I guess there's almost, did you ever talk to him about that? Like, why us, why not? I mean, in retrospect, you can see what it looks
I
like.
think we heard about them and we chased him down rather than the other way around.
But
Okay.
weren't we also already involved with Ralph? Weren't we already selling at the Smithsonian?
Yeah.
I think we were out there,
Yeah, we've been doing that for a
going
couple
out
years.
there and trying to sell. We were the concessionaires at the Smithsonian Folklife Festival.
We stayed at his house once, at least once. I remember staying at his house as opposed to Frank's house.
Yeah.
But otherwise, we stayed at an associate's house off the office of the life.
But I think we went in some people's terms from being viewed as hippie radicals to being young hustlers. I think was the word that, not in a negative
In a good sense, yeah. Yeah.
From Bob Kester. And there were other people, who were first, like, who are these people and, what's going on, to, wow, these guys are really going after it. And I think that may have been a part of Ralph's thinking, that, that we're not sitting in an office in New York, but we're going to the Brandy Wine Festival, we're going there, we had already been down to Louisiana, and recorded. I mean, there were a lot of things that were, that were happening. He saw us at, with Wolf Trap. We were
Even
really
Mike
active.
Seeger today just kind of distributes some of his records. He just gave a record that came out on Folkways recently that we would have certainly put out. And I think he just felt like that one should be on Folkways. It's the way he expressed it.
I was
When
curious about that because he's done a whole slew of records with you guys, and now he's out on Folkways.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that was his response. But I think Ralph probably, certainly Ralph believed in popularizing music to go and manage,
Bill Monroe, yeah.
Prince
Yeah.
Off sent out
Yeah.
to do the stuff he did with Newport and then set up the whole thing at the Smithsonian. His goal wasn't just to put it out on a record company.
Right.
It was to see something happen with it. And in that sense, comparing Mo to us being out there, right?
Even at that period.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean he was going to give us everything forever. He may have just felt like, put this project there and see how it does.
Sure.
It took him, as I said, forever to do the proofreading. We finally actually kind of cut it short instead of waiting for him. Final after he was like 95% done and we were still waiting 9 months. We finally just decided to put it out and just, take a chance. Because he still wouldn't let go of it.
What would you? And at some point, you kind of led the. Did you lead the way into Texas for Rounder, in a sense?
With the Tex-Mex stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that. How did you end up
Because
moving into that?
what really happened is that, how all the airlines started frequent traveler programs around 1980 or something, I think. And I had a ticket that was going to expire on Continental or Eastern or whatever it was back then. But it was going to expire at the end of September or something like that. And I said, I got to go someplace. Got to use it up. So what do I do? And I started thinking about where I had been and where I hadn't been. And looked at a map of the United States. And there I saw San Antonio. I said, geez, I've never been to San Antonio. I passed through there once, like really quickly on the bus, coming back from Mexico. But I've never really been to San Antonio. It's one of the biggest cities in the country. So I called up Chris Strackway and said, hey, I got this free ticket. I think I'm going to San Antonio. He said, oh, it's a great city, eat this place and this place and this place, and go to see the flea market out here. They got live music playing. He just gave me this long list of things to do, so I just did it. And I went down there, and I'd heard some of that music on Chris's records and seen Santiago maybe perform someplace. But I just got kind of excited about the idea of starting to work more with that kind of music. It was just around the same time that both Grave Combo and Joaquin Carrasco came to us with tapes that they had already made.
Well, we went to Great Combo.
I know we'd
We
heard
found
about
out
Grave
from-
Combo
from-
from Topic in
Yeah,
England.
no, Denver, Demon.
Was it
It was
Demon?
Interletter.
Okay. And so then was the next year I went back down again in May for the Window Festival.
Right.
And sometime in there, then I got the idea of going around to the small companies who had all put out local releases. Well, it came from Carl, actually, I guess, because he gave me a tape, Carl Francis,
Okay.
gave me a tape that he put together of some of his favorite Tex-Mex tunes. Because I guess I was talking to him, where do you get these tunes from?
Right.
And so forth. And so here were these small regional companies, and that just made sense for us, because like Swallow or somebody like that, but these were people in this area. So we put together those collections, and Carl edited all of them. But I went around and I went and visited each of the companies to make sure we could get a working relationship going.
No resistance at all? Or-
No.
Found money, different market.
Yeah.
They're very open.
Yeah.
Even getting the sense they're happy to see people. They saw us as a second market, and still do. I think. The Texas tornadoes to expand an area, but there's their market, and then there's the Anglo market. I know Mingo and South people are still think exactly that way. You could cut the same record for two different companies, for instance, because we reach such different markets.
Right. What was the first act that you recorded directly? First Texas act?
Santiago, I think.
Santiago.
Yeah.
We haven't done all that many,
Yeah.
actually, because they haven't sold all that well. But some of them have been reasonably inexpensive. We recorded a couple with him, a couple with Tony De La Rosa, and then some other people here and there, Eva Ibarra. But they don't quite sell well enough, and so we haven't really done much of anything for a couple of years now.
Did you?
I've always been interested in trying to find a young conjunto group that had the roots, but also had the desire and ability to travel.
Okay. Eva has not. She just does what she does and stays put. Sort of. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that there are a few things, and I'm still looking for a young swamp pop group. You feel the same way, that there'd be interest and that people would do really well.
Well, that's interesting. That's a real businessman's observation. Isn't it?
It's developed a little
Yeah.
because
Yeah. It's not enough for you completely to. To record Eva Ibarra or Mingo Saldivar simply for its own sake. You want to get somebody now who's going to get out there.
no, it's not. No, they're different.
Okay,
They're
yeah.
apples and oranges.
Okay, tell me.
But what would have happened with Cajun music if Beausoleil hadn't gotten out there? Steve Riley. There's it's not quite the same thing as what if you gave a party and nobody came, but it's sort of related. If you put out a record and nobody's out there touring, or the people that are out there are in a sense so traditional that they're not putting on a show, as we were talking about, Steve Riley early on, refusing to stand up, and here, that's for a dance. That's the traditional music is playing for a dance. In contrast to getting up there and talking between tunes, and I mean, the first time that we saw Beausoleil up here, they just did their usual thing. They played a song, and then they would stop and talk to each other on stage, and just not reach out. And they lost the audience because they weren't entertaining. And people, even if they loved the music, just weren't into it enough, and people started leaving. And they learned over the years, and in our market, in the Anglo market, the Johnny Dees of the world, there isn't anybody coming around and doing, there isn't a hot Kamunta group going around.
Right. But it's changed in the sense, I guess just an hour ago, Bill said to me, and he wasn't sure who it was, though he thought it was Pete Wernick, maybe you remember, was one of the first people who came to him and said, hey, I want you to do more than just put out my record. I want you to help me sell my record.
No.
I don't know if it really was Pete, but...
It wouldn't be out of...
No, it wouldn't be.
And that's how you were working, kind of from who they were, who he was, and who the band was, and trying
It could
to...
have even been Peter Stenson.
A young musician who wanted to get out there and work it. But so in a sense, at some point...
It wasn't Almeida Riddle, I know that.
At some point, you know...
Well, we also felt that with Thurgood. He didn't ask as much as we just felt it.
But at some point, you didn't feel it because you would just put out records and seemed satisfied.
Yeah.
At some point, you moved over to the viewpoint you just expressed about how I'm working at a transition there that's happened to you at some stage. I'm trying to get.
I think Thurgood was a major part of that, and it wasn't his asking; it was our perception.
Somebody really did ask, though. There was somebody that came to us and said, "It isn't enough to put out my record. I want you to try to sell it too, because I'm trying to earn a living here."
And the movement there, but the transition there, now I'm going to articulate it. You go from an artist saying to you as a label, it's not enough to put it out, I'm trying to earn a living from it, so I want you to push it, to Ken saying to an artist, it's not enough for you just to record an album, we want to earn a living from it, so we want you to push it.
Yeah.
You see, that's a significant transference at some point. I'm wondering, at what point did you move from there to the point where you're now telling the artists, you're the Pete Wernicks of the world.
Yeah.
And you're saying it's not enough for you to just record a record, and we want you to sell it to make us money to keep our company going. When did that happen to you? And I don't get me wrong, and I hope I've made this claim from the first day I met you. I don't think that's bad, but I want to sort of analyze it and trace when it happened to you.
No, we don't care about the music anymore. It's just the money. Yeah.
But when did you realize, or what made you realize that you needed the artist
I
to
think
come out
that's
and say,
relatively recent in terms of emphasis. I think that happened, more and more. I mean, there's just so many records coming out these days, and so many times that our distributors have just have told us, you're putting out too many records, you've got to be more selective. People downstairs in promotion and marketing saying the same thing. We can't work all these records at the same time, and no matter how many times we tell them, that's why we prioritize. I'll tell you the ones you don't need to work on and the ones that that we want you to emphasize on. It's just it's become more of something that we do think about. How much an artist is really throwing, how much an artist is going to do to promote their own record. We'll still take chances. I mean, there's this group now that's kind of frustrating called the Woodies that made a great record, but domestically they never really went around and worked it that much. It was there's always the cart before the horse. They would be happy to get out and tour if they had a manager or a booking agency or a record company that would go set it up for them. They've done it overseas. They've gone a couple times to Europe now. They went to Australia, although we had to underwrite some of the Australian thing. We got burned kind of because it didn't pay off. But it was a risk we undertook. It was just like the worst case scenario. It turned out slightly worse than what we were presented as the worst case scenario that could happen. Even a little bit worse than that. But they just had a success in Europe. Maybe they're still there, or maybe they just left a week or so ago. They just had a significant success there. But whether we're going to work with them in the future, I don't know. It's very doubtful because they don't seem. There's only two of them. It's not like they have a massive entourage with a bus and stuff they have to lug around. But they just haven't. I They can't. They just haven't gone and done what, maybe if they were a lot younger, maybe if they were 21 or something like that, they wouldn't think anything of sleeping on other people's floors or whatever people do, to get around the first couple times on the circle.
Who was your first, what we call singer-songwriter nowadays?
Well, at first we avoided the singer-songwriters, and at the time, Flying Fish was around and Philo was around, and so we just would funnel people to one or the other.
And I take it, why did you avoid them? I don't want to put words in your mouth, although I'm sure I know the answer.
Well, I think we, that early description of us from Pete Weldon.
Good calls over the last few minutes. You should be able to dial out now. Please let me know if there are problems. Call Chris at 4433 if there is still problems dialing along.
There's an early review of an album, or I think it was, or maybe a small article on us, in which Pete Weldon referred to Rounder as Root Musics and their contemporary offshoots. And that's what I think that we've done over the years, and the singer-songwriter didn't fit into that.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that Pete was responsible for restricting us. I mean, it was just articulating what we felt our mission was, I think.
Okay.
It's not as though we were fans of, say, early Bob Dylan, and so forth, Paul and I, and singer-songwriter, at a certain stage, certainly.
Why not? Why isn't Bob an inheritor of Woody, just as country cooking is an inheritor of Bill Monroe and Flat and Scruggs? I mean, you could make the argument that Bob is simply doing contemporary music in a folk tradition, a la Woody Guthrie, whereas
and
any number of bluegrass.
I think there's a difference there too with a Bob Dylan or a Bill Morrissey, who are very aware of roots and have borrowed aspects of other roots. People, Ellis Paul too, in the Woody Guthrie lineage. But there are other people that have none of that.
Sure.
That are, they're just, for lack of another use, they're doing acoustic pop music.
Right, they're entertainers, and I like them too.
Yeah, and if the right one had come along, the way Thurgood was the right one for that, it probably would have worked. If Bill Morrissey had started a few years earlier or whatever and connected with us that way, we probably would have been very open to it. Some of these things are just timing and introduction.
I mean, I know you've got them now. Would you have done, in 1973, would you have done Dave Van Ronk? If he'd showed up and said, I want to do
we would have
my stuff.
considered him a blues person.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we were
not
picking up
picking up
folk
the-
records.
Right.
I would say maybe, in answer to your other question, maybe the Woodstock Mountains would do.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, it's still very rootsy, but I think, that
we started a
Acres.
whole new series because it was different enough.
Right.
And then we had John Miller and some other people that came along in that series.
Putnam Stringtown Band.
Is that John Collins?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when do you think, now I don't know John Miller, who was the first?
Well, he was one of the guys from Country Cooking, but it wasn't the bluegrass.
Okay.
It was some originals and some older beats.
But very rooted.
Okay.
You should know, he's a wonderful guitar player.
Does he record a lot now?
Yes,
Or is it-
he
Hasn't recently. He had one joint record recently with.
And when did you start in earnest? I mean, was it not until you acquired Philo, which relatively, is that right?
Yeah, singer-songwriters.
Yeah, singer-songwriters.
Yeah.
Nancy Griffith was the first
Then-
signee.
And right, and when
This
did
came out
that?
wasn't much later. Patty Larkin was in there.
When did Nancy Griffith happen?
Nancy Larkin.
Oh, okay. And she was signed to Philo, though. You had the label already.
Yeah.
Okay. I
Well, we didn't
understand.
own it at that point. Nancy was, when Philo was a joint, not joint, but we were the solution to their bankruptcy.
Okay.
The first records that we put out on Philo were in December 1984. We actually released albums in December for many years.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Now we know we can't even release albums in November.
Oh, you get crushed in the Christmas.
Yeah, the last time we
Well,
put out a
between
record in
Christmas and
December.
also, then you were talking about independent stores. Now you have to go through chains, and you have to figure out programs, and you have to, as we were talking earlier, about buying your way into stores. And there was none of that. You had a new release, you put it out. And if the store was interested, they'd take it in. And if they really liked it, they'd put it on display or play it in the store. Very, very different rules.
The first album we put out on Philo were Mary McCaslin. We put together sort of a best of kind of, and a Utah Phillips album that they've been thinking about putting out but hadn't, of our IWW songs. And then
Something you would have put out otherwise. I would
yeah,
recall.
no, we wanted to sign Utah Phillips way back when, but we went with Philo, and that was very upsetting to us because we thought the combination of our protest series and everything else that we were the right place for him to be. Then 2 months later, in February '95, we put out that first Nancy Griffith album and also a Gene Whitpath album, which we been following right on from what they had done. The next month, the first Patty Larkin album. Later that year, Christine Lab and Phil Stain
They sort of jumped in.
picked up a lot of the same people they had. Continuity there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, did that cause you any trepidation? Just getting involved with Philo and starting that? That's a whole new line of work in a sense.
It was, but they were one of the labels that kind of came along and emulated us, the way we had in turn done at an earlier stage. And they were a pretty respectable label, like Flying Fish at a certain stage.
In the sense of independence and perhaps integrity, but the music still, as you
Oh, yeah,
recognize,
it
was
was different.
different stuff.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of records that we would have liked there, too. Maybe not quite as many, and they were different. They were more different than Flying Fish was
Yes.
from us.
But some of their artists were rooted, like Mary McCaslin,
Yeah.
is very rooted. Utah was in the political. They had the Canadian thing with the Philippe Renaud and John Carignan.
Early on, I had like Lazy Bill, Lucas, and Blind Jim Kruger, and
Yeah.
people like that we would have done. They had much more traditional stuff early on, and maybe they threw away from some of that. But even some of the other things they did, like New London and some of these albums, those were fun albums. Those were people that we saw on the festival circuit. We probably would have enjoyed putting out some of them.
Yeah.
The same way.
I still get a sense of somehow a willingness to expand was sort of on.
Well, we had to
at that
distribute it
point.
from the beginning,
Yeah.
too. As a record distributor, we knew many of these labels very well from their very first records, and we were their principal distributor. So we grew up with them at the same time, and we saw them do this. We traveled back and forth sometimes to their place up in Vermont, maybe a couple times before. And then when they just, being their distributor, when they said, would you take over and run the label, well, we were already, 35% of their sales by virtue of being the distributor of it. So it was a fairly easy thing to do in that regard.
We were sort of weaned too, I think, because we were distributed, and then we were the bank's solution to the bankruptcy, and then we bought it.
Right.
So
Maybe
it
about
was,
a year or 15 months later.
it wasn't like all of a sudden we're a singer-songwriter label.
Right.
And it's that we took over a pre-existing label. So somehow or other it didn't have to tarnish that that it might have if we had just started out and done it ourselves.
But certainly, we never would have on our own started a relationship with Jean Redpath. She was far enough afield from us. We just never would have done it. And yet we continued on then until we put out another 5 or 6 albums of hers subsequently before she got into, I guess, some other kind of or religious one.
Switch gears a little bit. It's a question I don't want to forget. You mentioned acoustic music earlier, and you hear a lot of comparisons to New Age music. I'm wondering what you think of those. How far afield do you think that gets, and what buttons it pushes in you, and how you
I think
be
it
able to
really
stay away from that?
I think it really depended on it's a very broad form, and there was some of it that was closer to New Age that to some people would be rather boring, and to others it was very lively. I mean, I certainly wouldn't consider Tony Trishta's music as being at all New Agey, but I feel that if he weren't so humble and had been out there promoting himself as some people on the supposedly laid-back West Coast did, that it might have been toad music instead of dog music.
But that particular West Coast guy that you may have made a reference to from New York.
Yeah.
Christmas,
Yeah.
New York, and,
Right.
And right now, there's a big controversy just over the weekend. There's a world music, group on, chat group type of thing. And so there's a big controversy now. They're all saying how all the New Age music labels are trying to call themselves world music labels because New Age has collapsed. And they see that as an area if they could just redefine themselves as world music.
Well, you could take one artificial construct and superimpose it over another artificial
Yeah.
construct.
Yeah.
What's the problem?
Right.
Yeah, they're all upset about this and so forth.
Called Celtic music,
We don't want
which is the
that.
third artificial construct.
Right.
I didn't get a chance to develop this with Marion too much, but she really launched into it. I know what I'd like to talk to her about more when she shows up. She talked about a point at which it just became really, really harder to get things out there. And she linked it with Best Buy, which got to the popular press in terms of loss leaders and stuff like that. What's your own senses of a point at which the business changed, that it really impacted what Rounder was and external factors?
That was kind of about it. I mean, that was...
Wound it up for me by years. I remember reading it, but I don't pay attention to when I was reading it. I probably was reading it after the fact, as when it filtered into the New York Times.
Right.
Well, that was probably around, 95 and 96 were the really rough years for us. It was pretty recent. There was, I would say probably still around 91. It's a little vague on the years now, but I would say still around 91. The Tower Records was probably 25% of our business was sold through Tower. And then these other places like Best Buy started opening up these large record departments and selling the records really cheaply, and showing up in different areas. Tower was trying to expand too, but so were they. People that weren't traditionally carrying music. Barnes and Noble started offering bigger amounts. Orders came in and started expanding, and suddenly, Musicland opened a whole bunch of superstores. They never didn't always do all that well, but a lot of people were emulating the Tower Records approach to having a deep catalog in your stores. And it was looking good to us because then Tower began to shrink. As we were always worried about Tower because any one customer, and that's 25% of your business, that's a concern.
How did Tower treat you, by the way?
Well, back then, actually, they tended to treat us reasonably well. At a later point, they treated us poorly. They started throwing their weight around. Maybe it was more like they were always very good, but then at a certain point they decided to enter into independent distribution, and when that happened, they wouldn't let us lead them. We were no longer free to choose our distributor. They told us if we chose to designate somebody else as our distributor, that they would throw us out of the store.
Did that happen?
Briefly.
Well, they didn't quite throw us out of the stores, but when we decided to go with our own, distribution setup that we had, they didn't order any new releases for a period of about 2 months while we were doing that. And that had some pretty negative ramifications. For instance, with Laurie Lewis, who's a West Coast artist, and Tower being the power that it is in the West Coast. Laurie's records were not available in many of her strongest areas. And, we had to deal with that. The whole question of trying to do what's best for the artist and looking at it in the long term and the short term and trying to balance things. It's a very, very difficult time for us.
Because we were also a distributor, we were conflicted too. I mean, just in principle, the idea of somebody saying, do what you want, or else, you can't be in our stores, that rubbed us the wrong way.
Right.
But if we hadn't been trying to run our own distributorship in competition with their distributorship, the issue might not have even come up.
Going back to Best Buy and Musicland,
Yeah.
just their price slashing problems, or did they
Well,
limit what they were
that
buying?
harmed other retailers. That drove a lot of independent retailers out of business.
And I don't see you as a Best Buy
Well,
item.
we did. They were our biggest customer.
Yeah, I never went there
Oh, wow.
for records.
No, they certainly started out selling Tower.
Uh,
I guess, it depends on the records that you have.
I'm saying, was it concentrated in certain areas? I mean, was it singer-songwriter as opposed to...
Well, Crowston did a lot of her.
Yeah.
The Tower didn't.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's kind of, they evened off the playing field some. I mean, Tower's never even been 10% of our business since that time. So in one sense, that's healthy. But on the other hand, it's now just a number of larger chains. And the independent stores aren't as strong as they used to be. Those programs that Marion was talking about, you had to buy your way into listening posts and all that kind of stuff. I mean, for a while, that was what we were being told was the only way that you could sell records. What all of a sudden, after about a year and a half, when it was really bad times, people started looking more carefully at what was actually selling, and virtually every record company decided about the same time to stop. And then, of course, it wasn't as prominent as it had been. I mean, it wasn't paying off. If you look at it, you pay $10,000 to be in a program, they buy 8,000 albums, but then you get 5,000 back. Well, that wasn't worth it. After you had a chance, a year later to see what had the ebb and flow, when the stuff ebbed back on you, you could begin to realize it wasn't something you could justify. We didn't have the money, and neither did the other independent album labels to do it anyhow, because we were getting so many returns back. We couldn't possibly think about doing all these programs. But then when you also looked at it, we had a rational basis for it as well. It didn't work. And even today, though, systematically, we don't study that as well as we want to. It's a matter of getting that information systems up to date to be able to monitor them. There still are programs that we get into. We're just much more cautious about it.
Aside from cutting back on the number of outlets, how did the entry of Best Buys and the rise of things like Musicland, how did that affect you negatively otherwise? I'm not sure I understand where Marion was going with that.
What was the first part of your question?
As far as cutting back on the number of outlets, independents, cutting back on the number of retail opportunities.
Cut out the number of independents. It also tended to cut back the level of knowledge and experience, because you often didn't have somebody in a Best Buy, who could also tell you about refrigerators.
Yeah.
Where in a record store, when we were all growing up, and I'm sure this is in your country too, people had real pride in knowing, and they were, usually music buffs.
Yeah.
And, it seemed that, as time went on, it became more like it's a job. And you had people with less knowledge and less passion in the record stores than previously. And I think certainly you got that in certain types of stores that concentrated on top 40 or just on, on hits. They wouldn't have the depth of knowledge.
Yeah, see, I see a lot of these electronic stores, and as having smaller catalog than Tower and Waterloo and Austin. It looks that way to me too, and most of my experience is as a buyer. I go and look for stuff.
They cut back dramatically because they did their own studies of what we're selling and so forth. It's been a corporatization of these things anyhow. A lot of stores want to have a look now. It used to be you could just mail posters to a store. If any clerk in the store likes a poster, they just pop it up on the wall.
Yeah.
That's rare now because stores all want to look like franchise chains. Even if they're only one-of-a-kind stores, they want to look like that because that's what they aspire to maybe somehow.
So the question I have is how it affected you, and we were talking about this record this morning just because it's a new record. How does all this affect something like this? How the hell do you put out and sell
Well, this is
that record. Did I ask you
something
if I
that's being debated.
And I'm talking here for the benefit of the tape. What am I talking about?
This is
Kentucky Old Time Banjo.
0394.
And it's new recordings for the most part, and a
Yeah,
new release.
they've been done over the last 20 years.
Yeah,
but
but
they're new recordings that were done by people.
you want to go on? No.
It's the subject of a lot of discussion right now because we don't know. I mean, some of these records, there's no big advance involved for the artists
Uh-huh.
on these records. They're relatively inexpensive to record. This is one of the records that's recorded by that same guy, Mark Wilson,
Right.
who is really a professor of philosophy. He does this as an avocation, just something he loves to do.
Yeah.
And he doesn't charge us anything
Uh-huh.
for doing it. He just wants to make sure that we pay the musicians fairly.
Uh-huh.
And so forth. But he's not looking to make money out of it. He hasn't got a penny out of it.
Yeah.
He probably even loses money. I mean, we can cover anything he puts in for expenses, but my guess is that inevitably he forgets to, charge us for a postage stamp or whatever. And so he probably loses a little bit of money. But it's basically nothing he makes money on. How many is this going to sell? I don't know. We have this other series.
And who's going to carry it retail,
Well,
based
yeah.
on what you've been telling me also?
Well, we think we may be at kind of an in-between area right now, and we're hoping someday that the internet will be a way that we won't even offer some records to distributors, that we'll only make them available by mail order, and that as it gets harder and harder to find a record like Kentucky Old Time Banjo in a store,
Yeah.
that people, either one or two things will tend to happen. People just won't put them out anymore because there's no way to sell them. And the people that might buy it if it were in a store won't go to the trouble of trying to find out where to get it. Or, more optimistically, there'll be just enough people that will get themselves on our mailing list or the companies their mailing list through the internet or whatever. I mean, they could already be on our mailing list. They could have been on our mailing list 20 years ago if they wanted to be. And we've got a decent mailing list, but we always know we're just scratching the surface. As more and more records aren't available at stores, the question is what will happen will be either people just won't really notice their absence, or they'll say, geez, they don't have the kind of records they used to have, and they'll go over to the book department, or they'll go buy a computer game, or whatever they'll do. People might even shake their heads with somebody else and say, boy, isn't it too bad that you can't find those records anymore, but not do anything about it. Or some number of people will find them. With the internet, it'll be easier to find them. You just say, geez, I really, don't you remember Grandpa Jones or somebody? I wonder what banjo records are out there now. And somebody will do a search on banjo on the internet, and they'll find, maybe they won't find us first, but they'll find some site that links to us. And eventually they'll find it. And if we provide a lot of good information, make it easy for people, if you want to download a song, see what it sounds like, maybe you want the whole album. Right now you could get 30 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, but maybe we'll end up making more available.
I wonder, to what degree are you thinking about that? I mean, you kind of started with the idea that Kentucky Old Time Banjo is going to be available. We're going to sell it.
We debate it a lot. I mean, every meeting that we have, this whole discussion comes up. We put out some old UNESCO albums that were originally released by LP and UNESCO collection. We're calling it the Anthology of World Music.
I've seen some of those, yeah.
And it keeps coming up. Are we even breaking even by putting these out? And so far, we each get surprised when every 6 months the royalty figures come in, and it looks like, geez, we sold 300 more. I wonder how that happened. Some overseas. I mean, there's different nooks and crannies and so forth. So far, it's still kind of marginal, but there's enough there. We haven't decided to cancel the rest of that series yet. But if it's something we talk about, there's 50 albums in that series eventually. We've only got, some of them are double and triple albums, but there's 50.
Discs.
Probably 35 different
Titles.
releases. And after 5, we're already debating whether or not we would keep the series going. The Lomax series has sold well enough. We're enthusiastic about that series. And we've got over 140 albums projected in that series, and I don't think there's any question that would follow through there. But when we start putting out volume 10 of the Italian Treasury, there'll be some challenges there too.
So what are your thoughts? I mean,
Different things that we will be trying. One of the things that we're trying with this particular album is going to be part of something called the North American Traditions series.
my old Kentucky band, or
Yeah.
my old Kentucky old-time banjo.
Now, this will be part of that series somewhat retroactively. The future albums are going to have a series logo on there, and there'll be a separate section of the website and also a separate website too, but then it'll be linked to our website. Just ways of trying to promote it as a series as opposed to just another album or something. Because we were pretty successful with the first Lomax series. We got, I think, up to 800 or 900 subscribers that agreed to buy all 13 albums in the first series. It was the easiest one to sell. Southern Journey, it was
Sure.
West music, blues, bluegrass, kind of. It was the easiest
It's
one.
got built-in markets already.
Yeah, so we knew that one would do better, but the idea is something we hope to spread, and so, promoting this as a series, at least people will know it's part of something bigger, not just rounded, but, something that's more confined and more definable.
My only consolation, rounder 1136, Greek political music or something? How the hell do you sell this record?
It's this is rabbinic music from Greek, music of the Greek underground. So
Yeah.
songs like The Junkie's Pain, The Jinx, it's I Gambled All My Change. It's all music from the Greek underground. Mother, They've Stabbed Me.
Yeah.
I mean, this was a rough scene apparently in Greece in the 1920s when this music came up. There was a lot of the dope pipe. And there was a lot of hashish smoking, drugs, gambling, prostitution, violence, and so forth. It was a pretty rough scene, and somehow they managed to record a lot of commercial records came out from this scene. Later, this kind of stuff was banned by the Greek government, and it really did go underground. But people now, I mean, it's in Greek for one thing. So I don't even know what they're singing, except that we have good liner notes that translate and give a context to the music. But still, it's Greek, and it presents certain challenges. We've put out about maybe 6 or 7 Greek albums now, and people now look to us to put out maybe 1 or 2 a year, and it's got a little following. I mean, world music came as a phenomenon came on somehow. It used to be the international section of the stores were like this place where the records slept. They were called covered with dust and stuff with the big Scottish bagpipe choirs and the Red Army chorus, and I mean, really some pretty horrendous, boring stuff would be back there. But it certainly has taken on another feel to the whole thing since that time. We've seen some albums do extremely well. This is Aria of Aurora,